in the Edo period, the samurai classes, what do you mean they've restricted iron? You can't buy it if you're not a samurai?
Well, so the entire Edo period is really a time of martial law.
Right.
And so prior to the Edo period, you had 250 years of civil war, basically.
Okay.
Clans fighting with each other.
Yeah.
When they finally unify the country, it's really important that these armies don't rise up again.
Right.
So they started restricting a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to make sure that armies didn't move from place to place, so they restricted wheels. They controlled the roads. They put up stations to make sure that armies weren't moving through certain places.
Really quick, during the Edo period, it's ruled by shogun. The shogun.
The
right?
shogun is,
he is from the samurai class.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he's basically the head of the samurai class. Above him is the emperor, but the emperor is basically powerless at this moment in time. And so during the Edo period, they're controlling everything. And one of the things they need to control, because this is a war material as well, is iron. So iron becomes a status symbol.
Okay.
So the more iron you have on things, the more power you have in society, the more you're showing off.
Sorry if I'm asking too many questions here. How exactly were they restricting iron?
Well,
you couldn't buy it, you couldn't possess it, or
right, exactly. So they're figuring out who has it and how much they can have.
Okay, got it.
Okay. So during the Edo period, there's a lot of sumptuary laws as well. So number one, you start out with saying, I need to keep these things for my army. And then number two, what ends up happening is because you've got 250 years of peace, or 200 plus years of peace under the samurai class, the merchant class does really well. The merchants do really, really well when there's not wars every day.
Right.
So prior to this, nobody had anything, right? You know, if an army's coming through your town every other week, then, you know, you're running off to the hills, you can only have as much as you carry. And then when the cities start to develop and they start to develop around these castle towns, you end up having peace and tranquility, and you start to acquire things. And when you acquire things, you need to keep them safe, and you start out by having a big wheeled trunk like those ones out there.
Right.
And we take the big wheeled trunk, we put all our good stuff inside it. When a house catches on fire, we roll it outside, right? And then in 1657, there's a big fire. Lots of people die.
Right.
They make the wheel trunk illegal. And then they start building fireproof outbuildings called kura. And the kura has big, thick walls. And when you put something in it, like a basket full of kimono, in the summertime, you get condensation in there, and all the clothes get mold and mildew and everything else. So Tansu become a solution for that, in that you can put your clothes or other good things inside. It's got kiri construction. It's raw wood on the inside, and it's lacquered on the outside in many cases. The lacquer resists the moisture. The wood absorbs the moisture.
Okay.
Keeps your clothes, your swords, your tools, your paperwork, everything from mold and mildew. And then you also need a lock to keep thieves out of it, right? So the lock starts out as something rather small and simple, and the handles start out as something small and simple. And then over time, they become more and more ornate. Now, during the Edo period, because everything was controlled, the lock plates were fairly small. You wouldn't have a back plate like this. Normally, it's just a couple of little rings, and the handles can be fairly thin. So it becomes a status symbol, and the more iron you put on something, the more powerful you are in society.
Got it.
Right? And the samurai are seeing these things, and if you violate any of these rules in terms of what they have, you can be banished, you can be killed for further violations of the sumptuary laws. So one of the things that happens is when the country opens up to the west and the Meiji emperor is restored, all of the same sort of thoughts in society about what is a status symbol exist, but all of the rules change.
Got it. Okay.
So now merchants run out with all of their money that they've been saving, and they buy a lot of kimono. And for all this kimono, they need to put them in a lot of clothing chests. And iron is still a symbol of wealth and power. So they have iron put all over the face of their chest. Well, during the Meiji period also, you're open into the West, and suddenly the price of iron drops. It's no longer a status symbol, and they switch over to the Taisho period style, which is kiri wood with very thin brass handles, little tiny locks, and that sort of persists to today.
Really quick. Sorry, price of iron dropped. Is that because iron's scarce in Japan?
Iron was fairly scarce in Japan, and forging was really expensive. So if you wanted to make some iron, you took basically small bits of iron filing and iron ore. You put it on top of a huge pile of wood, and you burn for days and let that all sort of sink down to the bottom. It gives you a little tiny block of iron, which you can then hammer and make into
Got
things.
it.
And that was a really, really expensive way of doing things because it's a lot of labor. So with a coal-fired forge, you're going to be able to save a lot of time, a lot of money, and then cheap iron's coming in from the West as well.
Right.
So it all changes at that moment, and suddenly again, it's not a status symbol anymore, and the way that Tansu look changes almost overnight. So you go from something like this. You see the face.
Edo?
No, this is late Edo Meiji, but this is sort of the look that you would have on an Edo period piece, where you have smaller, thinner handles, smaller lock. smaller backplates on the handles to something like this, which has got a tremendous amount of iron, is really making a statement. Now, these are two different pieces, but they're actually both expensive pieces because what's inside of that chest is really impressive. But that's sort of the difference in look.
Okay, so just to recap my understanding here, if you see a piece like this just covered in iron, it's a pretty good indication it's from the like 1868 to 1912 about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.